The room felt charged as Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the podium, her posture calm but commanding, eyes scanning the audience as if she already knew she had their attention. Across the hall, Judge Tanya Chutkan adjusted her robe, her expression one of composed authority, exuding the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to holding the final word. From the outset, it was clear that this would be more than a simple debate. It was a clash between legislative boldness and judicial precision. The moderator opened the session, outlining the topics: constitutional interpretation, government oversight, civil liberties, and the limits of power. But before any formal points were made, the atmosphere had already become electric, the audience sensing that sparks would fly. Crockett began with a firm, unwavering voice, framing her argument around the urgency of policy that directly impacts the public, the rights of marginalized communities, the importance of accessible health care, and the consequences of laws that, while technically valid, often produce inequitable results. She spoke with clarity, her words carefully chosen to resonate not just with legal accuracy but with moral weight. Chutkan listened attentively, arms crossed, her demeanor polite yet clearly assessing every statement, already plotting her next response. The tension was palpable: two pillars of American governance, each representing different facets of authority, ready to collide intellectually. As the debate unfolded, Crockett pressed on, highlighting recent legislative cases where laws intended to protect the public ended up disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups. She illustrated her points with hypotheticals grounded in real-world scenarios, painting vivid pictures of communities struggling under bureaucratic oversight. Chutkan responded not with emotion, but with meticulous logic, breaking down each hypothetical to illustrate legal precedent, statutory interpretation, and constitutional boundaries. Her voice was calm, precise, and slightly measured, a deliberate contrast to Crockett's passionate delivery. The audience found themselves leaning forward, drawn into the tension of ideals versus law, morality versus interpretation. Crockett paused for effect, letting her words sink in. Then she deployed a strategy that immediately captured attention. She flipped one of Chutkan's own judicial principles back against her, questioning whether strict adherence to precedent could sometimes hinder justice rather than promote it. The remark caused a subtle shift in Chutkan's posture. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she considered the challenge. It was the first visible sign that Crockett's argument had breached the judge's normally impenetrable exterior. The crowd murmured, sensing that this was no ordinary exchange. This was a battle of intellect, persuasion, and moral clarity. The dialogue continued, each statement layered with nuance. Crockett highlighted social inequities and argued that legislation should account for human consequences, not just legal frameworks. Chutkan countered with the essential role of impartiality, stressing that laws must remain consistent to preserve fairness, and that bending rules to meet perceived moral outcomes could set dangerous precedents. The interplay between them became almost theatrical, Crockett weaving emotion and logic into persuasive narratives, Chutkan grounding her rebuttals in the bedrock of judicial reasoning. Viewers online would later comment that the tension felt almost cinematic, a chess match played in real time. At one point, Crockett directly challenged a common judicial critique that legislators often overstep their bounds. She argued that ignoring systemic issues under the guise of procedural constraints was itself a form of abdication. Chutkan responded by reiterating that while intent matters, actions must operate within the confines of the Constitution, otherwise, the law risks devolving into subjective opinion rather than objective authority. The audience could sense a subtle power struggle: Crockett claiming moral authority on behalf of the people, Chutkan asserting institutional authority derived from law. Neither side yielded, and the clash intensified. By midway through the session, Crockett had already captured the audience's emotional allegiance. Her storytelling, about individuals affected by laws that prioritized procedure over justice, resonated on a human level. Chutkan countered with analytical precision, citing cases and legal texts to demonstrate that the judiciary's role is to mediate such conflicts without favoritism. The interplay was hypnotic, a rhythmic back and forth where passion met precision, principle met precedent. Every interruption, every pause, and every carefully placed counterpoint heightened the sense of drama in the room. Then came a turning point. Crockett highlighted the tension between social justice and judicial inaction in a particularly biting critique. She noted instances where court rulings, though legally sound, perpetuated inequality, asking pointedly whether adherence to legal formality was more important than real-world impact. Chuckin, for the first time in the session, hesitated before responding. When she finally spoke, her tone was slightly softer, acknowledging that while the judiciary operates within limits, it must also be responsive to evolving societal norms. A subtle concession that the debate was indeed pressing on her reasoning. The moderator attempted to guide the discussion toward balance, asking each participant to offer potential paths for reconciliation between legislative goals and judicial oversight. Crockett leaned forward, emphasizing collaboration without compromising the urgency of reform. Chuckin responded with cautious openness, outlining mechanisms through which courts and lawmakers could engage in dialogue while maintaining the separation of powers. The audience could sense a tentative mutual respect forming, though the underlying tension remained electric. Every word, every gesture was scrutinized, and viewers were captivated by the intellectual duel unfolding before them. And if you're watching this breakdown right now, stay locked in, because the most explosive moments are still ahead. Soon, you'll witness the precise instant where Crockett's argument turns a judicial principle completely on its head, leaving Chuckin momentarily speechless and the audience on the edge of their seats. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss a single second of this riveting exchange. It only gets more intense from here. The segment concluded with a controlled yet suspenseful pause, both debaters making subtle adjustments, as if silently acknowledging that the real fireworks were yet to come. The audience left that first act buzzing, knowing they had witnessed an extraordinary opening to a debate that would define perceptions of power, morality, and authority in ways few could have anticipated. As the debate resumed, the tension in the room had deepened, every eye fixed on the two figures now fully engaged in intellectual combat. Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly forward, her hands clasped but relaxed, projecting both confidence and calm authority. Judge Tanya Chuckin maintained her poised demeanor, but subtle signs, tightened jaw, sharper glances, revealed that Crockett's earlier points had unsettled her more than the audience could see. The moderator prompted the discussion toward judicial discretion versus legislative initiative, and immediately Crockett seized the opportunity. She outlined cases where legislative intent had been subverted by technicalities, arguing that when judicial interpretation strays too far from real-world consequences, it risks eroding public trust. The argument resonated deeply with viewers, who could sense the moral urgency behind her words. Chuckin countered with her trademark precision, emphasizing that the law must retain objectivity. She pointed out that while societal outcomes matter, the judiciary's role is not to rewrite legislation or inject personal or political preferences into rulings. Her voice remained calm and controlled, each syllable measured, but there was a subtle tension, a recognition that Crockett's framing of human impact could sway public perception in ways raw legal reasoning often cannot. The room was now alive with anticipation, audience members leaning forward, some nodding at Crockett's empathy, others appreciating Chuckin's methodical explanations. It was a masterclass in contrasting styles: human-centered narrative versus disciplined legal analysis. Crockett then brought up recent social justice issues, citing real-life examples where court decisions, though legally justified, led to unintended harm. She painted vivid narratives of communities disadvantaged by overly rigid interpretations of the law, emphasizing the human cost of bureaucratic compliance. Chuckin responded by acknowledging the weight of such consequences, but warned that subjective judgments, however well-intentioned, could compromise fairness across the system. She illustrated her point with precedent, showing that the courts have consistently prioritized consistency over selective outcomes to preserve equal protection. The audience could feel the push and pull of argument versus principle, empathy versus rigor. The energy intensified when Crockett introduced a strategic rhetorical move. She questioned whether the law, in its pursuit of neutrality, sometimes shields systemic inequities. By highlighting this tension, she forced Chuckin to grapple with the delicate balance between applying the law strictly and acknowledging the social realities it affects. Chuckin paused, then responded with measured acknowledgement, she admitted that while the law must be applied impartially, courts must remain aware of broader societal impacts. It was a rare moment where Crockett's pressure elicited a slight concession, though framed diplomatically. The crowd sensed the subtle victory, though both women maintained the facade of professional composure. Crockett's next move was audacious. She directly challenged Chuckin on the issue of access to justice, arguing that legal processes often favor those with resources, leaving marginalized groups disproportionately disadvantaged. Chuckin countered by pointing to legal aid initiatives and procedural safeguards designed to protect fairness, but Crockett swiftly highlighted the gap between theory and practice, citing statistics showing how many communities still face systemic barriers. The interplay was electric, Crockett using data and storytelling to illustrate inequities, Chuckin wielding precedent and procedural logic to defend institutional integrity. The tension built to a point where the audience could almost feel the room's energy crackling with anticipation for each exchange. At a critical juncture, Crockett executed a logic flip, taking one of Chuckin's own judicial principles and using it to question a widely accepted precedent. The audience gasped. The subtle shift was noticeable even to those unfamiliar with legal jargon. Chuckin, caught momentarily off guard, adjusted her glasses and paused, clearly recalibrating her response. Crockett's calm delivery, coupled with a pointed example, left the spectators on the edge of their seats. It was not shouting, nor theatrics. It was pure strategic brilliance, combining knowledge, clarity, and timing to exert influence over the debate. Chuckin quickly regained her composure, pivoting to procedural safeguards and the necessity of judicial consistency. She reminded the audience that laws are designed to protect everyone, not just those in immediate danger or distress. Her response was precise, methodical, and commanding, illustrating that while Crockett's arguments were compelling, the law's structure remains vital. The duel of styles, Crockett's empathy-driven advocacy versus Chuckin's methodical logic, was now fully apparent, each side reinforcing its strengths while exploiting the other's weaknesses. The tension was both intellectual and visceral. Crockett then brought the debate to a broader perspective, discussing the role of government in shaping outcomes that align with moral imperatives. She emphasized that legislative bodies carry a unique responsibility to act where laws fall short, framing her argument as a call for pragmatic intervention when justice is delayed or denied. Chuckin acknowledged the point but reiterated that even well-meaning interventions must operate within legal limits to prevent arbitrary or biased rulings. The subtle clash of philosophy versus procedure captivated the audience, holding them in a trance-like focus as each argument layered upon the last. As the debate neared its midpoint, Crockett shifted focus to the accountability of institutions themselves, asking pointedly whether courts can remain detached when systemic inequalities persist. Chuckin responded with a careful balance, defending the judiciary's impartiality while conceding that systemic challenges are real and require solutions outside of the courtroom. This rare admission energized the crowd, signaling a moment of dynamic interaction where both parties, while maintaining their roles, acknowledged the complexity of the issues. The moderator attempted to summarize the exchanges, asking the audience to consider whether empathy or strict adherence to law is more crucial in modern governance. Crockett leaned into the question, emphasizing human impact and societal responsibility, while Chuckin responded with a reflection on legal frameworks and procedural fairness. The resulting discussion was rich and layered, with neither side yielding but both highlighting the multifaceted nature of justice, authority, and policy. Viewers at home and in the room felt the tension build like a narrative climax. Crockett's measured persistence and articulate challenge had punctured the aura of invulnerability often associated with the judiciary, while Chuckin's precision and calm logic prevented any oversimplification of the issues. The result was a gripping intellectual duel where every point, counterpoint, and pause carried weight, and as the segment drew to a temporary close, the audience was left buzzing, realizing they had witnessed an extraordinary confrontation of power, principle, and intellect. Stay tuned, because the next part will take the debate to its most explosive moments, revealing the point where Crockett forces Chuckin into a rare defensive stance, and the audience gets a front-row seat to the clash of moral authority versus institutional power. The final segment of the debate opened with a palpable tension that seemed almost tangible. Crockett and Judge Tanya had already tested each other's boundaries, but now the stakes felt higher, as if the room itself was holding its collective breath. Crockett leaned slightly forward, her expression steady, her voice measured yet compelling. She began by revisiting the most challenging points she had made earlier, framing them in a broader societal context: the responsibility of lawmakers to ensure equity, the dangers of complacency in enforcing justice, and the human cost of overly rigid interpretations of the law. The audience could feel the weight of her argument. It was not merely a critique but a demand for accountability and reflection. Chutkan responded with her trademark precision, dissecting each claim with deliberate clarity. She reminded the room that authority comes with responsibility, and that judicial decisions must remain impartial to maintain public trust. However, she also acknowledged, with careful nuance, that laws are living instruments, and that courts must interpret them in a way that reflects evolving societal norms. This subtle concession, though wrapped in technical language, signaled a rare moment where the rigid line between legislative advocacy and judicial authority blurred, adding layers of complexity to the debate. The spectators, both in the room and online, felt the intellectual tension ratchet to an almost electric level. Crockett sensed the opening. She seized it, presenting a hypothetical scenario where a legal ruling, while technically correct, would perpetuate injustice in practice. Her words were precise yet vivid, painting a picture of communities left without protection and families affected by procedural rigidity. Chutkan paused, a micro-expression betraying her momentary recalibration. The audience sensed it immediately. This was a turning point, the juncture at which Crockett's moral reasoning directly challenged Chutkan's institutional authority. Crockett's voice, calm yet insistent, asked the ultimate question. When the law is blind to human consequence, does justice truly prevail? Chutkan answered with measured firmness, reminding the audience that the judiciary is constrained by precedent and legal frameworks, not personal sentiment. Yet, in the same breath, she acknowledged the tension Crockett highlighted, that the law, while objective, operates within a society with inherent inequalities. This acknowledgement, framed with careful diplomacy, added a subtle layer of vulnerability to Chutkan's otherwise unassailable stance. For the first time, viewers sensed a crack in the armor of absolute judicial certainty, and the energy in the room surged. Crockett's earlier arguments had not merely landed, they had forced a recalibration, a recognition of complexity that left the debate more dynamic than ever. The interplay between the two intensified. Crockett pushed the conversation toward accountability, questioning the mechanisms that allow inequities to persist despite legal protections. Chutkan countered with institutional safeguards, emphasizing checks, balances, and procedural fairness. Yet each rebuttal seemed to feed the other's energy. Crockett's rhetorical momentum building on Chutkan's concessions, Chutkan's structured logic tightening around Crockett's critiques. The audience felt as though they were witnessing not a traditional debate, but a cerebral duel, a chess game played with words, principles, and moral reasoning. At one point, Crockett executed a strategic maneuver that left even the most experienced observers momentarily breathless. She drew upon a series of historical rulings, juxtaposing them with modern legislative initiatives, and highlighted a pattern in which legal formalism inadvertently protected inequities. Her argument was clear, concise, and compelling, presenting a scenario in which legislative insight could provide necessary correction. Chutkan, usually unflappable, adjusted her stance subtly, noting that courts often rely on legislative guidance to refine interpretations, an implicit acknowledgement that the interplay between law and legislation is more fluid than rigid doctrine might suggest. The debate reached its climax as Crockett addressed the broader philosophical question: who truly holds power? The elected representative accountable to the people, or the judge tasked with interpreting the law? She argued that while courts enforce boundaries, ultimate responsibility lies in ensuring the law serves society, not just the letter of precedent. Chutkan responded with her characteristic calm authority, emphasizing that law provides the structure within which society operates, and that without impartial enforcement, the very concept of justice collapses. The room vibrated with intellectual electricity, each sentence layered with insight, challenge, and nuance. Crockett's final strategic flourish combined moral appeal with logical reasoning. She revisited key examples from earlier in the debate, highlighting tangible consequences of judicial interpretation divorced from social realities. She asked pointed questions that exposed the delicate tension between principle and pragmatism, questioning whether rigid impartiality could sometimes hinder justice. Chutkan, while holding her composure, acknowledged the validity of considering broader impact, but stressed that checks and procedures exist to prevent misuse of legislative power. The dynamic was now fully symbiotic. Crockett's arguments sharpened Chutkan's responses, and Chutkan's rigor elevated Crockett's moral urgency. The audience was spellbound. The exchange felt alive, almost cinematic, a rare moment where two domains of authority collided with intellectual brilliance. Crockett's articulation, grounded in empathy and practical consequences, met Chutkan's precision, grounded in precedent and constitutional responsibility. Each counterpoint, pause, and subtle concession added to the drama, keeping viewers on the edge of their seats. For online viewers, the tension was palpable even through screens. Social media lit up with comments analyzing every exchange, debating who had the moral high ground, who had the intellectual advantage, and what this interaction said about the balance of power in society. As the debate drew to a close, Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression composed, signaling that her points had been made. Chutkan, in turn, adjusted her robe, a subtle acknowledgement of Crockett's skill in challenging the established order. The moderator concluded the session, noting the extraordinary nature of the discussion, which had seamlessly blended legal reasoning with moral inquiry. Both participants shook hands, the gesture symbolic of mutual respect, yet the audience knew that the intellectual sparring had left its mark. Each had challenged and sharpened the other, leaving viewers with a richer understanding of the tension between law and society. The final moments held a dramatic resonance. Crockett's eloquence had humanized the abstract dimensions of justice, while Chutkan's methodical rigor reinforced the importance of structure and impartiality. The debate concluded not with a definitive winner, but with a lasting impression that authority is multifaceted, power is shared, and meaningful discourse requires both empathy and precision. The audience, buzzing with energy and reflection, left with minds stimulated, questions raised, and perspectives broadened. By the end, it was clear that the clash between Crockett and Chutkan was more than a debate. It was a study in contrasts, a narrative of morality versus authority, empathy versus structure, urgency versus procedure. For viewers, the experience was both enlightening and exhilarating, a rare encounter that blended intellectual challenge with dramatic tension. One thing was certain: this fictional showdown would be discussed, analyzed, and revisited for its brilliance in illustrating the nuanced balance of power in modern governance.